In a 5-4 vote, the Supreme Court found that criminal suspects that were arrested must be informed of their right to an attorney and against self-incrimination. In a 7-2 vote, the Supreme Court found that abortion was legal and the states could not try to make it illegal. In a 7-2 ruling, the Supreme Court found that symbolic speech, especially in the form of flag burning, was legal under the First Amendment. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that under the Eighth Amendment, it was illegal to execute people with mental disabilities. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional to impose the death penalty for a crime committed by a child under the age of 18. In a 7-2 decision, the Supreme Court found that a trial by jury was required in criminal cases, just as stated in the 6th and 14th Amendments. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court found that schools may not support religious authorities to sponsor even non-denominational prayer. The Supreme Court held that the National Firearms Act, which states that in transporting commerce guns, 12-gauge shotgun with a barrel less than 18 inches without registration is constitutional. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court found that the school can search students' bags in order to maintain order and discipline. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court found that an individual has the right to own a firearm for traditionally lawful practices, such as self-defense. The Supreme Court found that schools had the right to administer mandatory drug testing for students participating in extracurricular activities. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that no reporters have special privileges in the press clause of the First Amendment. They had to give up their sources before a judge. The Supreme Court found that all defendants must be provided with an attorney under the Sixth Amendment. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that public school students could be paddled without first receiving a hearing. The Supreme Court found that it was unconstitutional for state officials to compose an official school prayer and encourage its recitation in public school. In a 7-2 decision, the Supreme Court found that students could wear armbands to protest the Vietnam War. The Supreme Court found that the Rotary Club had to let women join because allowing women would not prevent the club from carrying out its purposes. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that states had to exclude evidence seized in violation of the Fourth Amendment. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that no alternative to the election of Bush as President of the United States could be established within the set time limit by Title III of the United States Code, which was December 12. In a 6-2 vote, the Supreme Court found that under the Fourth Amendment, no warrant was necessary for the trash left on the curb outside the house. The Supreme Court ruled that criminal suspects have the right to counsel during police investigations under the Sixth Amendment. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court found that it was constitutional for public schools to implement random drug testing for all student athletes. In a 9-0 vote, the court ruled that the First Amendment protects the publication of all statements, even false ones, about the conduct of public officials, except when statements are made with actual malice. The Supreme Court ruled for the desegregation of schools, and that the segregation of schools was unconstitutional. The Supreme Court held that the Eighth Amendment was constitutional in that it forbade the death penalty for the crime of rape. The Supreme Court ruled that the First Amendment prohibited the government from restricting independent political expenditures by a non-profit corporation. The Supreme Court ruled that laws prohibiting interracial marriage were unconstitutional. In a 9-0 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that defendants who distributed leaflets to draft-age men urging resistance to induction could be convicted of an attempt to obstruct the draft, a criminal offense. The Supreme Court ruled that state juries may convict a defendant by less than a unanimous vote even though federal law required that federal juries must reach criminal verdicts unanimously. The Supreme Court ruled that Congress had exceeded its constitutional authority under the Commerce Clause when it passed a law prohibiting gun possession in local school zones.